Hello, hello. Welcome. So glad you're joining us for our Lunch and Learn, our March Lunch and Learn. It's a great time to gather to hear from a great speaker. You're going to just enjoy our guest today, and also for our Alive at Last community to gather around our mission. So, our Lunch and Learns are about informing our and training our current engaged volunteers for the work that you do with Alive at Last in mentoring and leading small group ministry with Alive at Last. So, just excited about our trainings and how they offer support for those in this ministry that are on the front lines. So, welcome. I'll do a little bit of an introduction for those of you that maybe this is I see a few new names. Those of you that are new to Alive at Last, Alive at Last exists to help women who've experienced any type of trafficking or sexual exploitation to live a life of freedom. So, where we engage with these women is in the Dallas Fort Worth area, where we serve our partner sites, places like Salvation Army in a residential program, Union Gospel Mission, and then other smaller safe houses, places where women have been rescued or they've endeavored to walk away from a life of trafficking and sexual exploitation. Maybe they've been in the sex industry, serving just working in strip clubs. Maybe they've walked the streets of Harry Hines and been involved in prostitution. So, whatever their background, when they arrive at the safe houses and shelters where we initiate a relationship, they have a certain amount of time. The clock is ticking. Before long, they'll have to transition out. Those programs are anywhere from 8, 9 months up to 18 months. And then what? If they don't meet Jesus, that's what Alive at Last does, is offer faith-based small group support and mentoring. If they don't have a healthy person in their lives to navigate the future, they cycle back into that lifestyle up to 7 times. And so we step in. Is it number 2 that we step in? Is it number 4 that we're stepping in? We step in and initiate a trust-based relationship in order to help those women who have been freed. It's a whole nother thing to live a life of freedom on your own. So that's what Alive at Last is all about. We help women live free and discover their God-given purpose. So share the mission, share the mission of Alive at Last with your friends, those in your network. We need more people to take action on the front lines and be a part of the answer to the problem. So, just to let you know how you can get involved, you can go to our website, aliveatlast.org. And from there, as you click Take Action, you can fill out a volunteer application. Our mentors are completely remote. So, just a great flexible opportunity to walk alongside women. We provide all the training you need. And you know what? It's really rather simple. The fact is, the average Christian, I'm not talking about people that are licensed counselors, licensed ministers, have 10 years or more experience as a Christian. The average Christian has the answers. They've been placed in our hearts. We have the answers, and we can be equipped to solve the social needs that are in our world today. One of them being helping those heal from trafficking and sexual exploitation. Well, I hope you have your chat box ready. We're going to jump in and get started. Our team prayed in advance as we jumped on. We're going to get started with our training today. You want to take notes. We're recording this. So for those of you that are in our private platform, our Mighty Network platform, it will be there for you to go back and listen to again. We have a number of our volunteers that check that, check in on our trainings after the fact that couldn't attend live. So that's always available to those of you in our community. I would love for Crystal to put that link in there so that everybody who has, if you're here today and you haven't joined our private platform, where you can stay updated on all of our ongoing trainings, where you can hear about everything Alive at Last. We want you to follow that link and jump into that private community. Well, I'm so excited to have Dr. Joyce Martella with us today. It's just thrilling to meet women like Dr. Joyce who have navigated their own healing from layers and layers of trauma, and then they're ready to step in and provide healing for others. I'll tell you, most of the women we serve, they're just glad to feel better. They're not even thinking about helping someone else. And so it takes years of healing and years of hard work to get to the place where Dr. Joyce is today. Dr. Joyce, we are so thrilled to have you. And just thank you for your time. Thank you for your preparation for this event. Alive at Last welcomes you. We'd love to hear a little bit about your story, knowing that you actually came from a cult, that you had early trauma, and you stepped out of that life, went against everything that you knew, and stepped out of that life at great risk to yourself. And then today, where you are and what you're doing in your work. Oh, we want to hear from you today. Welcome, Dr. Joyce.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for showing up today. Um, for me, this is really about serving others at this point in my life and bringing hope to others who have been exposed to trauma, whether it was in their childhood or other times in their life. My heart really goes out to people specifically who've been in cults because that's where I come from, especially those who were born and raised in them. It's a different um it's a different thing when you're born into that kind of environment than when you join as an adult and leave. And when I first started really looking for my own recovery or trying to figure out, what had happened and how I could resolve some of these issues, I didn't understand that I had been exposed to trauma. And in fact, I remember one of the first times I talked with other people who had been in the cult who were also out. And I said, well, I didn't really have any trauma. All these other people did. And some of the adults looked at me and said, that's not true. And I'm like, but I saw worse happen to other people. So if I saw worse things happen to other people, then what happened to me could not have been so bad. And I think that that's something that often happens with people who've experienced trauma. They see someone else and say, well, they had it so much worse, so I should just, get over it, or just, it wasn't so bad for me, so I'm not really someone who needs help, or I'm not someone who really deserves to look at myself as having had trauma, right? And so it was kind of strange when people looked at me and said, "Oh, no, 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 we saw you traumatized. We saw what your mom did. We saw these things." And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to reevaluate this, right? And look at, okay, what really happened? Because there were so many things that were keeping me stuck and so many things that were holding me back. And I didn't even understand really what was going on and why it was happening. And when I first left the cult, I was 24 and I had two children and my husband. And I think about now, 24, I was a baby. But at 24, I didn't think that way. I had already been, I mean, I became an aunt when I was 9, started taking care of all the other little kids around me. By 12, I was taking care of 10 to 12 children all day. And so for me, I grew up fast in some ways, and in other ways, I was not really allowed to go through the developmental process that most people go through. And I definitely was not allowed to go through the process of finding my own identity. And I think that that was one of the biggest pieces. It was like when I left, who am I now? And I was told by my mother when I left, you no longer have the blessing of Isaac. You have the curse of Ishmael, and God has turned his back on you. And bad things are going to happen to you. And I believed when I left that bad things would happen to me, that I could probably get cancer, I might die, get in a horrible accident, my house would burn down, and it would all be because I was being punished for leaving. And for me, that was really hard to actually deal with. How can I leave if all these things would happen? But I had come to a point before I left, probably about 6 months, no, maybe even 4 months before I left, I was actually going to commit suicide. I had gotten to a point where I didn't see any way out, and I felt like I was drowning. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And for me, I thank God that he actually showed me in the bath, full of blood, and my daughter saying, "Why won't mommy wake up?" And at that point, I knew, okay, I can't do this. This is not my way out. I can't leave my children. I can't do this to my children. But I was so desperate that it was like, I just have to end all of this. And I didn't even really understand what I needed to end at that point. I just knew that this was just too much. And then looking at my daughter's face in this vision that I had, I was like, oh, no, no, no. I can't leave her to this. I can't let her suffer what I'm suffering. There's got to be another way. And I started thinking, like, what can I do? Can I run away in the middle of the night and get my dad to come pick me up? And how will I get my kids there? And I mean, because people who tried to leave often were put into a room and kept there for 24 hours or more and just read to until they changed their mind. So I knew that just leaving was not, I couldn't just escape that way. I couldn't just leave by myself like that. And then finally, my husband and I were like, okay, we got to go. But then my mother convinced him to stay, both of us to stay, because she told him that the blood of the children would be on his hands. And then he was like, okay, I can't. We got to try to stay. And we did try, but within a month we were gone. Things just really turned around, and we became the object of every inquisition and going to, in front of the elders about really stupid things, but it was just constant. And then we knew, we had to leave. And there was something that my mother had said that really made it real for me. My father-in-law had touched me I mean, my stepfather had touched me inappropriately. And he was an elder and her husband. And when that happened, and I went and I told about it, I was told that I blew everything out of proportion. And then later, after my husband and I said we were going to leave, we were called to this big elders meeting and we were asked if that was the reason. Well, that had happened like 8 months ago. No, that wasn't the reason. That was a trauma that was buried and gone, and I didn't even think about it anymore. And she said, and so we both said, no, that wasn't the reason. She said, good, because she taught him to comfort women in that way. And my husband and I left, and it's a 2 hour drive back to where we lived. And we didn't even speak for the first hour. And then we just looked at each other and said, we got to leave. And for me, it was, well, if this can happen to me and it'll all be washed under the rug and it'll be okay, it's going to happen to my daughter. And what's going to happen to my son? And so then it was like, no, we got to go. We got to go. And that was where she said the one thing that would make it so that we would leave. And I didn't even realize at the time what a trauma that was for me, the whole thing. And, you know, to tell you the truth, him touching me was not as traumatic as her reaction to it. How she negated me, said it wasn't a big deal, wanted me to just shut up about it. That was more traumatic in some ways than the actual act. And
Dr. Joyce, the fact that you bring that out, it's not uncommon for us to, as we mentor and serve alongside women who have experienced specifically sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, sexual trauma, for when they do tell their safe person, the person that they think should protect them, oftentimes it is mom. It could be another adult, maybe an aunt that they're staying with or grandmother. They are shamed or made to take responsibility, or the sexual abuse is minimized. And so I think what you're saying is actually more common than we actually realize. I want to ask you about something pertinent before before you transitioned and how you
right.
left the cult. You mentioned the fact that this is significant, that you were in all of this control, mental control, all of the physical situation around you being controlled in the cult, and you said you actually feared leaving more than you did staying on the front end. I think that's really interesting because, sometimes we see that as well, where women are afraid of what's next. And in a sense, as mentors and small group leaders coming in, working alongside, we want to say, you've already lived through the most scary, and so can you tell me mentally what's going on when women are saying, oh, I've got to transition and live by myself. I've got to learn how to be independent. How am I going to do this without someone there? Because that is rather significant, I think, for our population. And you can tell us how we might can relate.
Well, and I think too, because of course, people who, let's say, are in the sex trade or any of that kind of stuff, they're told, um, we're the only ones who appreciate you. You leave and you're going to be seen as being dirty and bad, and nobody else will ever treat you right. And we're the only ones who treat you right, even though they're the ones that abusing them, right? And nobody will, you'll never get a job. Nobody will ever marry you, all of those kind of things, because what they're doing is exactly what was done with me, is using the control to keep them there. And so what happens is, it's like we're the only ones who care about you, even though what they're doing is not caring about you, right? And we're the only ones who will take care of you. We're the only ones who will show up for you. You leave and nobody else will be there. And for me, I didn't even know when I left that I was leaving a cult. It wasn't until a year after I left that I knew that. I just knew things were wrong. And I knew I had to protect my children. I did not leave for myself. If I hadn't had my children, I probably would not have left when I left. I left for my children. And I believed God was going to turn his back on me. And I believed these bad things would happen. But I also had this belief that God wouldn't judge my children because they didn't make the decision. So I would get them out and save them, even if the worst happened to me, because in my mind, I still believed in a God that wouldn't harm little children, even though I didn't believe that about myself, right? I believed that
Yes.
bad things would happen because, I mean, these were things that I had been told. And not only that, but you have to understand, like, and I'm sure this relates to people that you're dealing with too. I was told these bad things would happen. People would leave and bad things would happen. And then we would be told, see, maybe someone got in a car accident because who knows why. And then, see, they got in a car accident because of that. They wouldn't have gotten in a car accident if they hadn't left. So look, they got cancer. Look, they did this. Look, that happened. And that all happened because they left the protection of the cult. And so, and of God, right? That's what we were told. He will only protect you as long as you're here. Of course, it didn't really, I didn't process the fact that my daughter had broke her arm, that people there got sick, that one of my best friend's daughter died there. Where was the protection then, right? But I didn't, it didn't, I couldn't separate that. All the bad things would happen if I left. Everything that happened there was of God. So I just needed to, accept that. But if I left, it was the bad thing. So it's a control technique. And it's also you're also made very dependent. So you don't earn money, don't, you don't have your own things. I mean, you have your room set, your bed and your, clothes, but you don't really have a lot of anything. And so you're very dependent. When I left and my husband and I moved into the first place that we moved into, I was like, Michael, we don't have water and we don't have electricity. What do I do? How how do how do we get that in here? It wasn't there when we moved in. And so he was like, well, I'm going to ask at work. I'll ask in a way that nobody will really know that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll figure it out and I'll call you. And so he did. And he said, well, what do you guys do, for electricity around here? Who do you call? Right? He's trying to figure it out. And so then he tells me, oh, you got to call this company and you got to make an account and you got to, oh, okay. And I'm like, what about the water? And he said, I think you got to do the same thing. I'll figure that out too. So it was like we were in this house for a couple days before we had electricity or water because I didn't I didn't know those things because I was so dependent that I didn't know any of that. I didn't know how to do that. And so it was really hard and it was scary. It was scary being out there. And when I did realize that I was from a cult, I didn't talk about it. It
Yes. Yes.
there was
You
so
now
much shame.
you're mentioning the fact that the whole identity piece and you really being under the mental control and that sort of thing. Could you just speak a moment about that spiritual control? That's really a component that is out there in abuse. The one that I recently heard about was before being raped by her pimp, she would have to read scripture. And so, rather a twisted form of spiritual control. Can you kind of speak to that and how we can recognize spiritual control with those that we serve?
Well, yeah, I think and it's not just spiritual control can be in different ways other than just with God and scripture. It can also be with meditation. It can also be with all kinds of different things. When you think about the different cults that are out there, there's actually a cult that's a running cult. They made the children run and they made them participate in marathons. Sadly, because they made them run so much, the children got shin splints, and they messed up their legs because they were still growing and they shouldn't have been doing it that much. And it was a practice and it was a spiritual practice. It wasn't just running, like go and have a jog. This was a spiritual practice and they were controlled with that. So when you're looking at that spiritual control, it's it can have different forms. So we think about scripture and religion, but there's so many other ways. And there's cults that are meditation cults, and there's cults that are educational cults. Oh, we're going to give you a program that's going to make your life better, right? So it's not just God and the scripture that can be used. It's all these different areas where they really get you tied into not just the belief system, but also the dedication and your devotion to it. So that is a piece that yes, you can recognize, but you have to listen for it. You really have to listen for it because they don't even know. They're not going to tell you, "Oh yeah, I had spiritual control." No, they're not. They don't even realize that that's the impact that it had on them.
That's a great point. So, actively listening in conversation to recognize points of control, be they spiritual or mental, it might not be as clear to us unless we're recognizing that control factor, like you mentioned, through meditation or some sort of other practice.
Right.
Thank you for that great information. So, then you mentioned the fact that really with all of that, it was hard for you to recognize your own value and
Oh,
who you
definitely.
were. I
Yeah.
love that because here's the thing. I love that you brought that out. The identity portion is what we're dealing with on a regular basis when you're dealing with victims of trauma. They've just lost sight of who they are and their individual value and worth. So
Yeah.
continue.
So for me, when I left, I had two children. So I was in survival mode to take care of my children, to do the best I could to take care of them, be the best mom that I could be, and do that. It was a struggle because I was having to sort out the things that I had been taught that were not okay, and zero in on the things that felt right to me. And so that was kind of difficult. Like my mom always hit us with a wooden spoon. And I remember my kids, they had gotten out of the yard and they were walking up and down the street, and I caught them and I brought them back in, and I said, I was just like hysterical, all the bad things that could happen to you, being out on the sidewalk, right? We were in a pretty safe neighborhood, but still, it was like, no, you can't do this. And so I brought them in and I spanked them both, but I was so not into it. I mean, I was so feeling like this was the wrong thing that I really couldn't even spank them very hard. So I remember my daughter told my son, cry so mom will feel like she's doing the right thing. I know it doesn't hurt, but just cry so she thinks she's getting the point across. And I remember after that first time, it was like, okay, no, wooden spoons are for cooking. They're not for spanking your kids. And I realized I have to find different ways, right, to actually deal with my kids. And both my kids were very smart too. So they would just, well, why don't you just give me a spanking and let me go out, because then I can go do whatever I want. No, we got to restrictions and things like that, taking away things that they liked. And they didn't like that as well. They would rather me just go ahead and give them a spanking. But I was just like, that was it. I did that once and it felt so wrong to me that I really couldn't even do it to make any impact, except they were going to cry to make sure I knew I was doing a good job. It's like how twisted, right? But um so I had to really go into that survival mode to be a mom. And that's what I did. And it wasn't until my son graduated high school that I went back to school. And that's when I really started delving into my own, not that I hadn't talked about it before and worked through some things. I realized that it was a cult, but I had reached out for help one time and that didn't work out. So I was now really working through this, trying to figure it out myself. And it was when I was in my BA program, we were doing a cultural class, and I realized that I had left my my cult was my culture. It was it was my religion, it was my family. We talked in a different way. We, we were isolated. And when I left, part of what I felt was I didn't understand how the world worked. And I was so hyper vigilant that whenever anybody said anything to me, it was always, what do they really mean? Trying to figure out what do they really mean? And how's this really going to impact me? And I got to figure out what they really mean so I can respond in the right way so that bad things don't happen to me. Because in the cult, if you didn't respond in the right way, something bad could happen. So you were constantly trying to read the other person to figure out what was going on so you didn't do the wrong thing. And I'm sure that that is true for people in the sex trade also. It's like trying to read, what do I do? How do I act? And it can shift. It can shift from day to day, from person to person. So you constantly have to read the person in control so that you do the right thing and you don't get in trouble. And so when I left, I carried that with me. And it was constantly hyper vigilant. And what do you really mean? And what do you really want me to say? And how do I really need to act? So that took a lot to actually sort that out. And I did that for a long time. And there are still times when that will come into play. What do they really mean? What are they really saying? Right? And I have to check it and go, wait a minute, maybe they're really just saying they like me. They're really just saying they appreciate me. Just back off. It might just be what they're really saying. But now I can process that. It took a long time to get there. And then with the whole identity piece, I spent my life being what my mother wanted me to be, doing what she wanted me to do, um, saying what she wanted me to say, acting the way she wanted me to act. And anytime I got out of that, any part of me that would naturally come out, well, I was punished for it. So I was constantly burying those authentic pieces of myself. My personal identity had to be buried so I could protect it. And I liked to mimic people, you know? So I would see somebody do something, then I would act them out. I did that one time, and she so shut me down that it never came out again. It was like, nope, that's a bad thing. Put it down. You can't do that. You can't let that out. And so it took a while when I was in my master's program. I really was delving into what happened. What happened to me? And what happens to people who are born and raised in cults? And as I was going through that, I realized that my developmental process had also been hijacked. And I didn't get to go through the regular teenage kind of figure out, oh, does he like me or doesn't he? And, get in the fights with the girlfriends and figure things out. And who am I? And what do I like? And, I don't have to go along. No, there was none of that. I didn't get to go through that. And I didn't really know how to make friends. I could be a really good friend, but I didn't know how to find people that would be a friend to me. And I realized that I didn't know how to set healthy boundaries. And so instead of learning how to set healthy boundaries, I just cut myself off. I won't let anyone in because I don't know how to let anyone in without letting them hurt me. So therefore, I will let nobody in. And that doesn't work either. And so I figured that out and really started to understand for myself. So then it was like, okay, so my dissertation, it was all about, now that I know that I had complex trauma, I had interrupted development and hijacked identity, how do I heal and how do I help others heal? And that's where I am today.
Oh, what an amazing journey. First of all, I would just say to you, we're just so blessed that you did so much of the hard work, because your story is encouraging. The fact that God did such amazing things in your life, it's encouraging to know that wherever we are across the gamut in this on this call today, and even those that we serve wherever they are, hearing your story, Joyce, just gives courage and faith that if God can do those amazing things in your life, he can certainly do those things in ours and the lives of those that we love and serve. So can you tell me what was the catalyst when you left the cult? Was there, you had your husband and children, so there was that unit with you. Um, when did you actually find out who God is, as far as a loving God versus who you had learned that who you'd been told he was?
Well, I was lucky. I don't remember not knowing God from the smallest child that I ever was. I remember before the cult had formed, being in church with my mom. And if I moved or if I made a sound or anything, she would pinch my thigh really hard for me to be still. And it hurt. I remember I remember one time the preacher was going on and on and on. And so I remember saying, Jesus, please let the preacher stop so mom will quit pinching my thigh. Please, Jesus. And then the preacher stopped. I was like, thank you, God. Thank you so much. I don't have to be pinched anymore, right? Because I was little. I was like 3. And I still remember. And I remember looking up, they had a cross with, and then they had pictures of Jesus and stuff. And I just remember looking at him going, please, Jesus, please make the preacher stop so she will stop pinching me. And it was like just a very innocent, very a relationship with God that was really based on, you know, you love me and I'm yours. So of course you're going to take care of that, right? And he did.
That's so amazing. That's so amazing. As Christians in the Christian world, oftentimes, and if we've been raised in fairly functional Christian families or just good families, you wouldn't, you just always remember there being some good factor. But I find too, also in many of the lives of the women we serve, they may be spouting off just lots of profanity, telling about their crazy lives, and they'll say, "But God's always been with me." That's not uncommon.
Right.
It's an amazing thing to just be reminded that we have a loving God who is the great initiator, and He's working to
Right.
speak to the lives even of young children. So when you
Well,
transitioned,
I
go ahead,
I
doctor.
wouldn't say that when I left and a year after when I realized that I had left a cult, that my mother was a cult leader, I was pretty angry at God. And I was
Yeah.
like, why me? Why did my mom have to be a cult leader? Why me? Why did I have to live this life? What did I do? And as I moved away and through my own trauma and through my own understanding, I got to a point where it was like, okay, if not me, who would I put in my place? And I was like, nobody, not even my worst enemy would I have trade places with me. Um, and I did have a hard time getting back to God because the scripture was used to control me and beat me up and everything else. And so I I had a hard time getting back to the Bible. And sadly, my daughter had issues with addiction. But because of that, I started going to 12-step recovery, which she went to NA and I went to Nar, which is like Al-Anon for family and friends of addicts.
Yes.
And I learned to see God in a different way and I learned a new language to speak about him, the higher power. Okay, I can do that. And so I learned a new language to actually address God. Not that God had ever left, but I was having a hard time communicating with him because the line of communication that I had was used to traumatize me. So I I couldn't go back to that right away. And then when I was in school, the school I went to was Jungian, so Carl Jung. And so I learned another language to actually understand God with the soul. And I was like, okay, I can see God in all this. And I can see how he works and how he speaks in different languages. I mean, he can speak to people where they're at, right? It doesn't always have to be through the scripture. And now I can read the Bible. Now I can do that. But it took a while for me to get back to that. I still struggle going to church because there's so many churches that do things that are very triggering to me. But I do church online, which works good for me because then I don't get triggered and I can still worship and get the word of God and all that. But I have never said, "Oh, the only way for you is to go into a church," because well, that was kind of it traumatized me.
This is
So,
such valuable information for us, Dr. Joyce, because most of us, and including me, I started with Alive at Last as a volunteer, been raised in church and had great experience. And so when you step over into a world where women have been manipulated and abused, and some of them are not ready, they're just really not ready to hear about Jesus. Can I, as a Christian, put that right over here and be a healthy influence to them without making my number one goal to evangelize them. I think there's just such room for that because the truth is, I do believe God makes himself known to people. They may not know he's the totality of who he is and the loving God, but I do believe he makes it his goal is to tap into our hearts from a very young age. And so I think there's a level of freedom that can come with us as we're stepping in alongside these women. If they're not open to talk about topics of faith or about God, it's really okay. And that we can actually learn to talk about various topics. We can talk about their interests, validate them, and gain trust first, and then when and if they're ready. And usually for us it typically does happen eventually. I know very few survivors that don't eventually become open, but that's just valuable for us to hear, Dr. Joyce, is that it's okay for us not to share a scripture if it's triggering. It's okay for us to share a poem, to share a good thought, and we're not being any less of a Christian. We're not betraying Jesus by not presenting the gospel to someone who's not ready to hear or doesn't want to talk about spiritual topics.
Well, and with my work with people who were born and raised in cults, so many of them had a pseudo-Christian background. Um, I do not go there. Now, I have had people who have said, "Yeah, I do still believe in God." And I even had one young woman that I worked with ask me to help her learn how to pray because the place she was raised, women weren't allowed to pray. So if you just back up, what I mean, come on, we've heard it over and over. They'll know we're Christians by our love, not by our pounding words and beliefs and you got to do this and you got to do that,
That
right?
is so good. It's still right. And I think sometimes that we think they'll know we're Christians by our truth is what we put all other things in that to finish that sentence rather than they'll know it because of our love. So good.
And then they're going to want to know, how are you the way you are? When they start asking the questions, then we can start introducing why we are the way we are.
Yes. And what a great point. The fact that they're asking questions, people are curious and they are looking for someone who's doing life maybe what they would call well. I know that there's always the self-critic. None of us have the perfect lives. There's dysfunction in our families, but maybe it's something that they would value. And so if we can have that relationship and let them have a window into our lives a bit at a time, and those questions come, when the questions come, then there's an open door to step through and share what they're able to hear. That's just such good things for us to remember as Christians. Dr. Joyce, any more comments about how I want our audience to just begin to prepare if you have questions for Dr. Joyce about her story, maybe about someone that you're mentoring, serving, a family member, someone in your community that you'd like to ask Dr. Joyce questions about her situation and how it might relate to those that you're serving or to your own situation. So, Dr. Joyce, as you transitioned and began, did you have then no contact with family and those from your past life? Were you able to break that, make a solid break?
No, I was cut off.
Okay.
So I wasn't choosing to not have any contact. Contact was broke off.
Mm. And
So
with
none of
that,
my brothers or sisters contacted me, and they could not interact with me. And I lost connection with all my nieces and nephews, and then all the other people that I grew to love in in the cult, all the people that I had known since I was a small child. Some of them I'd known since I was a year old, and others like 6 or 7. Um, and so these were people who were in my life. I mean, I didn't have like, not everybody I had this wonderful relationship with, but these were people that I knew and I loved and I cared about. And I was completely cut off. And so I didn't have any contact with them. After we had left, we got a bunch of letters that were really mean letters and stuff. So we had to quit opening the mail and we just started sending it back because that just was not going to work. But no, nobody reached out. I was in this huge family, and then I was just me and my husband and my kids. And it was devastatingly lonely and isolated, and I didn't really even know what to do with it. I would go in my closet and cry into my pillow because I was trying to hide it from my kids. Later, my daughter said, Mom, I knew you went in the closet and cried in your pillow. I said, Well, I was trying to keep it from you. She said, Yeah, you didn't do so good. So it was like, oh, that was disappointing, because
So
I
then
was,
you had to navigate all this rejection after you left that community.
oh, definitely.
Well, Dr. Joyce, I think we have actually our first question in the chat
It
box.
looks like I never got to the other stuff I was going to
I,
present.
I want you to. I want you to. We
Okay.
can wait on our Q&A. Go ahead and finish your next portion, please.
Yeah, I would like to at least go through it because I think it's some valuable information. So let me share my screen. Let's see here. Share. There we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So, what I'm talking about is how past relationship trauma can impact present relationships. And um, so the thing about it is that um, it's trust versus mistrust. When you are in an abusive and traumatizing relationship, you learn to mistrust everything around you. You don't gain trust. And even when you do have trust, oftentimes that trust um, is misinformed. Like you have the trust, but you probably shouldn't have. So trauma can erode trust in a relationship. And that's any kind of relationship, including domestic violence, including the sex trade, including being in a cult, all of those things. Mistrust is formed instead of trust. Now, this happens especially in children because they don't get that bond and they don't learn to trust. Instead, they learn to mistrust everything. And they're always measuring everything. What can I trust? What can I trust? And usually they learn that they can't trust much of anything. It can affect one's ability to trust others. Even when you leave the abusive relationship, you go into other areas of your life, you have a hard time trusting those other people that may come into your life. You just don't quite, you can't quite go there because you're afraid. And it can impact your ability to pick trustworthy people. So it's not just about trusting, but it's about knowing how to have good boundaries and then to pick people that could be trustworthy. You tend to pick people who fit what you've known, which tend to not be trustworthy people. And so all of this impacts your ability to form trusting relationships. Your self-image. So the trauma erodes your self-worth. And for children who never developed that, it can be even more impactful. But with with complex trauma, when we're talking about complex trauma, we're talking about trauma that repeats over and over and over again. So when we think about trauma, generally it can be a car accident. But why is it that one person has a car accident, they get over it, get in a car and drive, no problem. Another person has a car accident and they become agoraphobic and never can leave their house. Okay. That's because trauma dysregulates the system And if it dysregulates it to a point that they can never get back to their prior regulation, so they were living life, life was going good, everything, they had a car accident, and now they can't even leave their house, right? Or maybe it's not that drastic. They just can't drive a car. They can't go places where cars are, right? So it depends on the person and how much that impacts them. But when we look at how trauma affects us, and complex trauma then is even worse. And we often will see that someone who responds to a trauma, an incidental trauma, um, very severely, oftentimes we'll see that they had trauma in their past. So they didn't learn to regulate after a trauma. Okay. It inhibits the ability to form a positive self-image. So you're constantly hearing the negative voices in your head. And so you internalize that. It sits on your shoulder and you start to think, well, maybe I can't. No, you can't. No, no, you're no good. You can't do that. Nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to love you. Nobody's going to want you. Everybody's going to reject you. Just don't even put yourself out there. And so you don't even see yourself. I say it's like we know that an anorexic looks at themselves and sees themselves as being fat. We look at them and go, you're skin and bones. But that's not the reality. The reality when they look in the mirror is that they see fat. For a person who has endured complex trauma, they look in the mirror and they see someone who's not worthy, someone who's not intelligent, someone who nobody can love. That's what they see. And so you can't just say, no, you're not fat, you're skinny to the anorexic. You also can't say to the person who has not developed a positive self-image, oh, I'll just tell you all the good things about yourself and then it'll be better. They have to actually process that and actually learn to look at themselves in a different way. And I actually have a whole way that I do that, which helps people process that. Trying to please others, but never feeling that you're enough. Constantly trying to get that approval, which you're never going to get. And it puts you in a cycle of, okay, well, if I'm just better, if I can just do good enough, if I can just do it right this time, I'm going to get the approval, I'm going to get the love, I'm going to get the acceptance. But what they don't know is the people they're dealing with are never going to give them that because they can't or won't, and they're not going to get it from them. And when you try to do that with people that you don't know, they don't even know what you're doing. What are you doing? Why are you needing this from me? They don't understand. The individual looks to others for validation, constantly looking to someone else to validate who I am. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. No, you have to actually find that within yourself. Nobody is going to be able to tell you that. As long as you believe that you are not good enough, nobody's going to be able to convince you that you are, no matter what they say. It's a process of healing that you have to go through. And I did that. My mother told me that I wasn't smart. I never would be smart. We had bad genes, and I shouldn't even try to get an education. And I believed that. I was dyslexic. So my dyslexia fed into that saying, see, I'm not smart. I have a hard time spelling it. I always spell words wrong. And in math, I'm constantly inverting the numbers. So it must be true. I'm not smart. And I really had to fight that. And when I graduated with my BA, I had a 3.75. And I like, see, I must have fooled everybody because I'm not really smart. And when I got into my master's program, I had to write a letter to get in there. And it was very difficult because I really didn't think I was worthy to get in. But I was fighting against that. I was coming up against that, saying, no, I think that I can do this. I know that I can do this. Yes, I'm going to face my trauma. I'm going to go through, and I got a 4.0 in my master's. And at that point, I finally, it's like if you put your fist into a mirror and you shatter it to pieces, the image is gone. And for me, that's what getting that 4.0 was. It's like, okay, I can't go back to the lie anymore. Here's the truth. I didn't fool all those teachers too. No, I really am smart. I really did do this. And that was a lie. And then in doing that, I was able to start addressing some of the other lies and breaking those as well. It creates dependence instead of independence, which can disrupt the ability to form interdependent relationships. Until we actually have a sense of independence, we really can't become interdependent because we'll just become dependent again, if that makes sense. So in relationships, you really have to know yourself and be independent before you can be interdependent with another person. Otherwise, you just go from one dependent relationship to another. The need for healthy boundaries. In cult and in other abusive situations, children are not only not allowed to have boundaries, they're told you don't get to have boundaries. We can do whatever we want, say whatever we want, and you can't form boundaries. You're not allowed. Um, or maybe you just have poor boundaries. So a little bit of boundary, but not very good, and people can just kind of rush right through them anytime. Broken boundaries. You create a boundary, someone breaks that. Because of the other things I said, you need acceptance and validation so much, you go ahead and let them run right through your boundary. Intimacy, rejection, and not just intimacy with a partner, but also even intimacy with our children and with other people in our life. And when you deal with so much rejection, it's really hard to open yourself to that. Poor self-image. I'm not good enough, so nobody's going to love me. So maybe the only thing they're going to ever want from me is sex. I can do that, but they're not going to really love me or care about me, so I'll just leave it there. Forced intimacy, when someone forces you to be intimate, really to be sexual when you don't want to, but also even to be intimate. No, I want you to tell me how much you love me and be that thing for me, even if you can't get that from the other person. And rejection is really strong in this. My mother, I realized every time I would go get a hug from her, she would say, "Get off me. Leave me alone. Back off. Just quit hanging on me." And I realized every time I went to her for comfort and acceptance and love, she rejected me every single time. And eventually I quit. I figured it out and I quit going and asking for hugs. And even when she did hug me, man, I was so blocked off. I did not even care that she was touching me because I knew that it was going to end in rejection and I knew that she wasn't going to give me anything. So it was just like, fine, you want a hug? You got a hug. Bodies touched and I was closed off. When I had my daughter, I realized I was never going to reject my daughter or any of my children when they wanted a hug. And I remember my little toddlers, they're hugging me and I'm hugging them and now they start squirming to get down. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to get down, you can get down, but I'm not going to put you down. And as they got to be teenagers, it was like, I remember like they were in their early teens and we'd be hugging and they kind of pat me on the back and go, Mom, are we done yet? Like, we're done if you're done. We're done if you're done, but I'm not going to stop it. And then as they really got into those teenager years, I hate you, Mom. You're the worst mom in the world. I would have them go and um, just take a time out, take a minute, go to your room, sit down, pray, do whatever. I'll come in and talk to you in a few minutes. Then I'd come in and I'd talk to him. We'd talk through the issue. And then I'd say, okay, now we need to have a heart to heart. So this is where my trauma got healed in relationship with my children. And then it turned into a strength. because now I said, we have to have a heart to heart. And a heart to heart is when I push my love into their heart and they push theirs back into mine. You have to have an open heart for that to happen. And at first, I'd get that lean in hug, but they just kind of lean on you. Their arms are not even touching. And I said, no, 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 that's not it. Then I get the noodle arms where their hands are just kind of barely touching me. Like, okay, fine, I'll give you a hug, but I don't really want to. And I'm, no, 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 that's not a heart to heart. Come on, you know. And then you feel the moment when they shift and their heart opens. And now they're hanging on to you tighter than you're hanging on to them. And I would say, do you feel my love? And they'd say, yes. Do you feel mine? And that's where we healed. Even those little things that were happening now, my trauma was healed in relationship with my children and then turned into a strength, which then I've also told other parents about and they can now use with theirs. Fear of intimacy, just fearing opening up and even allowing anybody to come in and to know you. And that I mean that not just sexual intimacy, but just even a friend to really know you is very fearful and very scary. But there's hope. I learned long ago that as we experience trauma in relationships, it's in relationships that we find healing. I was not happy about that. I was actually kind of pissed when I figured that out. I wanted to be able to go off, heal myself, be a whole, full person, all better and all healthy. And now I could be in relationships with people and everything would be wonderful because now I was this healed person. And I found out if you are traumatized and harmed in relationship, it is in relationship that you find healing, just like I did with my children. One cannot heal the wounds created in relationship in a vacuum. You can't go do it all by yourself. It doesn't mean you have to be in an intimate relationship, but it can be in relationship with your children. It can be in relationship with one good friend, and it can be in steps. So not every relationship will be the same. You may heal parts in relationship with one person and parts in relationship with another, but it is in relationship that we heal. And then there's my information.
Dr. Joyce, what a great wrap up with those words. We heal in relationship. And so when we're out there and we're locking arms with others, not only are we able to heal from our trauma, but we're able to offer that healing to others. Thank you so, so much for your training today. I want to just ask you, do you have the bandwidth of about an extra 10 minutes to
Yes,
open it for Q&A? Thank
absolutely.
you, Dr. Joyce. So we've gone a little longer, but Dr. Joyce is allowing us a few minutes for Q&A. If you have a question, just unmute yourself. You can also put your questions in the chat box. So one of the questions that was in the chat box earlier was, did anyone actually, after you left, did they reach out to you?
No, no, they did not. Not even my siblings. And that was really difficult. My two of my sisters are 10 years older than me, and they did a lot of the raising of me. And so that was very difficult that I didn't have connection with them.
And you haven't seen them since?
Actually, no. Um, one of my older sisters is out now. She actually left, and we have actually reestablished a relationship. And I have a brother who's still in, and no, he does not talk to me. And another brother has passed, but he did not really have anything to do with me. And then I have another two other sisters who both have passed. And so I didn't really have the chance to have relationships with them.
How were you able to find safe people is another one of our questions. You said you mentioned how it was rather difficult for you to recognize a healthy person when you saw them. How would you say you first started finding safe people?
Well, One, I had to open myself up, and some of the people I thought were safe weren't. And I had to learn how to recognize that. And I had to learn how to have boundaries. And some people can present themselves as being safe and as being aligned with you. And then you find out they're not. So it's really about continuing to be observant and find out, are people saying and doing what they say they're doing? So people can talk a good game, and then you just have it. It's really hard because you have to go ahead and say, okay, they're saying all the right things. I want to see if this is going to work. So it's kind of like you get into the water and you see how it is. And they tell you it's going to be warm, and you get in and you go, okay, it's okay. It seems warm enough, right? But then the things that they tell you that are going to be there, as you start seeing those things not be there, or you start seeing a different side to them than what was presented, you have to start putting up boundaries, and you have to say, okay, well, no, that doesn't align with me. So no, I have to put a boundary there. And then sometimes with those people, you have to completely and totally disengage yourself because you realize, no, we're not aligned. I thought you were, but we're not. And so as you open yourself up, you're gonna find people who are not what they say they are. And so I would say I'm one of those people that when I get into the water, I go in really slow. I'm not jump into the water and get wet fast. And if it's too cold, I'll get back out, right? So,
What you're saying is so key. And as mentors and small group leaders, if we say we're going to call at 1 o'clock, unless we're sick or we cannot, we had an emergency, we dare not show up late. What you're saying matters because it's
yes,
establishing trust on the front end. And so I just think that's a major point to be made. Oftentimes in the world we live in, if you're not recognizing it, you can just take it, maybe move appointments and move things around. But I just want to encourage those that are on our call today that as mentors and volunteers with Alive at Last, we show up when we say we're going to show up. And it is only by a real emergency that we even move our appointment times. In our small group settings, we have a an attendance policy for our small group leaders. You're there. You're going to be there every single week. You just show up, or we need to move the start time for the small group to accommodate because we're not going to be a hit and miss. We
right.
just have to do what we say we're going to do. So important. One question we have from Tuesday Dickens is, what methods do you use to help others heal?
Well, okay, I would say the very first thing that anybody who's experienced a lot of trauma, they need you to listen to their story. But the second part of that is you need to validate it. And it doesn't matter how unbelievable it is. It doesn't matter how far-fetched you think it is. It's their story. It's their life. And it's how they experienced it. So some people from the cult that I came from didn't experience things the same way I did. That does not invalidate my experience. Some people saw my mother as someone who helped them. That's not who I saw her as. I saw her as my mother who had time for everybody else, but never had time for me. And when certain things happen, she shut me out and shipped me off. If I made her uncomfortable, she removed me from her sight. And I mean, I made her uncomfortable because she wasn't showing up for me. Not I made her uncomfortable because I said anything wrong, but I made her uncomfortable because she knew she was not showing up and she didn't want that to show. So she moved me away so I didn't make her feel uncomfortable. I didn't realize that as a child. I just felt rejected. But
Yes.
so it's just so important to listen to their story and validate it. And people are going to tell you things that horrify you. And you think it couldn't possibly have happened. But if they're telling you that it happened, believe them. And I would say for those of you who are listening to stories that do horrify you, you need to have a practice yourself for being able to release all that from yourself because there's such thing as secondary trauma. Okay. So I learned something from this wonderful woman. Um, she was a psychoanalyst, and she actually, in her practice, she had a bathroom in her office with a shower, and she always left enough time between her appointments so that if she needed to go take a shower to just wash all of the trauma and everything off of her, she could. And times when she didn't, she had a practice where she would think, okay, I'm just going to wash. I'm going to let the water, imaginary water, just fall over me, wash all this trauma and all the stories and all the pain. And I'm going to let it drain into the earth and just push it into the center of the earth because the earth can handle it. And so the idea is we do need to have a practice ourselves to release ourselves. And I'll share with you that I did a podcast and there were some people who had some reactions, but then there were also people who reached out to me, and it was about the cult that I was in, who reached out to me and they were like, I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't, I felt all those things too. And I didn't know it was like that for you. And wow, you really made, put some of the pieces of the puzzle together that I didn't understand. And so in 3 days, I talked to three different people who were just, I mean, pouring out their trauma and things that had happened to them. And I was like, I got a headache. I was feeling sick because I was internalizing it all. Also, because it was also triggering my own trauma, right? Because it was related. And I really just had to pray and ask God to just wash it, just take it and wash it off of me because it was too much for me to bear. And I did, and he did. And then I was like, oh, my headache's gone. Thank you, God. Because I realize even though I understand it, even though I lived it, hearing all of that can really impact you. And so having your own personal practice to really wash that off of yourself. It's not that you're forgetting about what someone's told you, it's that you're washing the residual trauma off. So it's important. And I mean, I would say that that really is the most important thing is to listen to someone because they have not had someone who is willing to listen. And sadly, there are therapists who can't handle it. And they instead stop seeing the client, say, oh, I can't, you know, this is out of my this is something I don't deal with. I don't know, sorry, you're gonna have to find somebody else. And that's why I'm actually in the process of getting a program out there to teach therapists how to deal with this kind of trauma.
Well, we are so grateful. We need more like you, Dr. Joyce. Thank you for the great information today. Thank you for what you're doing in your own personal life to just move forward and grow and inform a community out there, inform the world, the contacts that you have about how to heal. And we're just so grateful that your experience has been used for something good, that you would actually use your own experience for the sake of others. So thank you so much. Thank you for the extra time that you've given us today.
Oh, no
It was an
problem.
honor to have you.
Well, I'll leave you with this. Like I said, when I first left and I realized I was from the cult, I said, why me? And then I came to a point when I said, well, who else? Nobody. And then when I was in my master's program, I said, oh, okay, I know why me. I was born to do this work. And that's where I am now.
Yes, yes. Dr. Joyce, if there's anyone on the call in closing that might feel that they need does specific help with support coming from a cult, is there something that you might recommend?
Well, definitely you need to find someone who understands cults or someone who is willing to learn about it.
So we have your information in our chat box. Is that I see that with so thank
Yes,
you for that, Crystal. Thank you, Dr. Joyce, for making that available to us and to our
yes,
audience. All right.
absolutely.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for showing up today and educating yourself, taking action to be a better mentor, to be a better advocate for those in your community, to heal from your own traumas as well. And so, thank you for being a part of this training today. Have a great week ahead. If you want to find out more about Alive at Last, or you have any more questions for Dr. Joyce, we can certainly let her know those. You can connect with us at aliveatlast.org. There you'll see my personal email and those of our team members as well. We're here to be a part of your journey moving forward ahead. Thank you all. We'll see you next month at our next Lunch and Learn.
Thank you so much for all you showing up,
Thank you, Doctor.
and thank you for having me.
Yes. Goodbye, everyone.